did you first grow curious about the paranormal? Dare you dig deeper? You are listening to Hounds of Asher.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to this new episode of House of Asher. This is actually episode 81, and we're sitting here in my little studio on a rainy Saturday afternoon, just turned afternoon, and I'm pretty excited. As you guys know, and I always tell you right up front, I'm always trying to be transparent. This show is kind of a labor of love for me. I have folks on that I find that are interesting, that's doing interesting things, that have researched interesting things, and have brought different information, new information, and kind of challenge convention on stuff. And what's so great is that I can do this whenever I want and have whoever I want on. So it's a very it's probably as close to me ever being a dictator as I can be. But it's done with love. I swear it is. So I'll kind of get into a little bit of a introduction on our guest today. Stephen Myers, he is an author, lecturer, and independent researcher. Stephen Myers has studied the Great Pyramid for over 20 years to understand how this ancient wonder of the world was built and why. His research includes traveling to Egypt to conduct extensive on-site research of the Giza Plateau. Stephen Myers has written numerous magazine articles and given many lectures on the subject of the Great Pyramid, compiling his research into 2 books, which provide a comprehensive and detailed explanation on how the Great Pyramid was built and why. He was also the founder of a nonprofit foundation dedicated in understanding how and why the Great Pyramid was built. The mission of this foundation is to redevelop these ancient but advanced technologies to help our modern but troubled world. The foundation's website is www.thepump.org, and I should also mention Steve Myers lives in southwestern Oregon with his wife and his 2 dogs, and if I believe this is correct, his website is www.stephenmyers.org. I should also mention the Great Pyramid Prosperity Machine, Lost Technologies of the Great Pyramid. These are both on Amazon and Kindle, ebooks. And, we're going to get into it here in just a minute with Mr. Myers. And I want to thank you guys. I should probably mention, because like I said, sometimes I remember and sometimes I don't. Do check us out on Spreaker, check us out on TalkStream Live, check us out on, my goodness, so many things, iHeart, SoundCloud, a whole bunch of different stuff. But do go check out stevieasher.com. To do a little plug, it's shameless, but it's necessary. And join our group, and also come on Spreaker, come to our chat room, get in there, ask some questions. Let's really get into it. So without further ado, if I haven't already put this man to sleep, Mr. Stephen Myers, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's so weird because, like I said, researching. Anybody I try to talk to, that's generally how I get an interest. Want to have them on. It's obvious you love travel, and it's obvious that you love going to these places, and it's not. You can usually tell when someone, and that's not to say that you're not going at it from scientific method, but there's a real joy in that. You can generally tell when people are doing something for pure academia and maybe just get papers out or get papers published, but it's obvious that you are just, as we'd say here, plumb crazy about like ancient technologies and pyramids and all that. Let me ask you, what is your origin story? What is your Batman story? How did this come to pass? Something caught your eye or something to draw you into this? What was it?
Well, I'm kind of more of a techno nut than a lot of people. I like technology and that type of thing, and as well as history. I like history as well. So I collect antique gasoline engines, which are quite interesting in themselves. The old one-lungers, and I like technology. I have a technical background, amateur radio operator, the commercial FCC radio class commercial license, and other things like that. But I do a lot of technology, and when I was in high school, I enjoyed studying during studying World War II. I wasn't interested in the politics or the generals or any of that, but more like interested in how the battleships operated or how far the planes could fly, that type of thing. So I've always enjoyed technology. And if you like technology and history, ultimately your focus will be on the Great Pyramid because it's a highly technical structure that was built in ancient history. So that's how I got started, and here I am.
Well, when I was a kid growing up, I mean, we would talk about in school a little bit about it. I mean, it's almost, just like you talk about ancient cultures like Samaria. I mean, they would talk just, it was like a blurb, maybe a paragraph. We really didn't get too deep into it. And of course, all the movies like the Charlton Heston movies and all the Moses movies and all that, and Ten Commandments. And so you see this kind of Hollywood version of stuff, but it seems like the reality of it was so much deeper. I mean, can you touch on a little bit about, like, just structurally, how was it different than what we would see today, where it's just sort of these, rocky, kind of washed out looking stones? Do you have, an idea of kind of how it really looked back in its prime?
Well, the Great Pyramid, when it was first built, before it was ravaged by the hands of man for at least 40 centuries, was, a magnificent structure. It is notable for being at one time covered with these finely cut casing stones that were made out of limestone. And they were cut together, they were cut, and the joints were so precise that they were almost imperceptible. So there was some very high precision stone cutting, but on a very large scale. So that's pretty remarkable. And they glistened in the sun. The Great Pyramid. Some believe it or not say it may have been painted a particular color, but they were not just thrown together by any means. The Great Pyramid, but it was built with extreme precision and certainly planned out from the beginning.
Well, that's the thing, is that so many people have that kind of, again, I kind of say Hollywood version because that's kind of what you knew. You hear about the things of ancient times, and people depict it in certain ways, but you have, these guys, they're pulling these large pieces of stone. You got the guy with the whip, and it's this torturous slave driving, built purely on the woes of these people. How close was that to being truthful? I mean, because obviously, I don't think most of these people, obviously, if they were a slave stock, probably were not educated in fine, cutting edge, pardon the pun, technologies in regards of shaping and making stones, like you said, so well together you couldn't get a piece of writing paper in it. I don't see how that would work.
Well, there is a narrative or a story that's being told about what most people are familiar with, a great big ramp that
Right.
would have been bigger than the Great Pyramid itself, with these slaves or whatever dragging stones up a ramp or whatever. And we're all familiar with that. That's the story that Egyptologists have told for 100 years, and it hasn't changed. So but the only problem is, and I read, when I first got interested in the Great Pyramid, I read those books that Egyptologists write, and they write about doing the precision stonework using hand tools. They have pictures and they write and talk about that, and they talk about this big ramp and moving stones. You get slaves. In antiquity, there have been slaves, and you have them drag these stones up a ramp, and I've heard about that. But after I read those books, I thought, oh, all I need to do now, since Egyptology is a science, is see their scientific demonstrations that lend credence to their hypothesis, their story. But I found out something. That a lot of people don't realize, and it's kind of a fascinating piece of information, and that is Egyptology has no demonstrations. There is no demonstrations. Egyptology has existed for 200 years, and they've never made a single casing stone. Isn't that
Wow.
interesting? They say working people can make them all day long, but experts, Egyptologists, they can't do it. And they say working people can drag a stone up a ramp without any handling scars. The precise cut stones of the King's Chamber, for example, don't have handling scars on them from being moved. Right. But the largest stones of the Great Pyramid are 70 ton, and the entire science of Egyptology has not moved a 70-ton payload 1 inch.
Wow. I was going to say,
isn't that interesting?
Well, it's it kind of sounds like smoke and mirrors a little bit, honestly. And like you said, there's that thing of going, if it's so easily done, why isn't it still being done like that? Why aren't they popped up everywhere like McDonald's everywhere? I mean, don't get me wrong, and there are different variations of stones and or like the step up pyramids and whatnot in different locations across the world. But it's one of those things, like you said, show me. I've got a lot of family from Missouri, so I'm like, show me it. Demonstrate this, and that's wonderful because, like you said, there's so many aspects to it that seem so far advanced. I mean, even by now, it would be a chore. If people using modern stuff, it would be a chore.
Yes, it would be a chore using modern technology to cut the stones and whatever. Although we have granite countertops that are quite smooth, but we're talking modern technology. But we're not talking strong back muscles or hand chisels to produce extreme precision, and it's never been done. Egyptology can't do it for one very specific reason, and that reason is they are wrong about how stones were cut and how stones were moved. So it's quite interesting. They've never moved. Many of the quarries are on the other side of the river. They've never moved a stone on or off of a barge. They've never done anything. It's just bizarre how they can get away with that. Let's say I was a scientist that studied how cows jump over the moon. Okay, you can read about it in literature. There's books about it and mythology about cows jumping over the moon. But that science wouldn't go very far because people would say, show us a cow jumping over the moon. Well, in the same way, Egyptology is in that same crisis. They can't demonstrate the things that they say are true. So it's very strange. Very strange.
Well, like we talked about, and I will ask you a question that had actually been posed to me in the chat room. That's where you kind of have the difference between what I would consider unbiased science and conjecture or dogma. It's like you tell people something enough and they don't argue it, it becomes fact. That's not my quote. I forget who says it, but it was one of those things where there's like what you call, well, that's just common knowledge. Oh no, it's a common belief. It may not be common knowledge. It may not be truthful, but it's believed to be true. And yeah, there's a real bad quality of that going around. And you see it in anything. It's so funny that you'll speak to people who are academics and speak to people who are quite religious, and it's kind of a flip side of the same coin. Sometimes it's just like, well, I couldn't say that. I can't question this. I've got tenure. They're going to, run me out of here. And I've seen researchers and scientists who they weren't saying that they're necessarily 100% wrong, but they're saying, like, there's other evidence we really should weigh in this because we're not really getting a true picture of what we're seeing. We're looking at stuff with one eye closed, and we're kind of doing the science firstly a disservice, and we're also doing the people that we're telling this a disservice. And like I said, again, you end up with a lopsided truth, and that's unfortunate. Let me ask you this question real quick. Garrett from Florida asked, I guess he's talking about, I don't know if he's talking about carbon dating or what, but he was asking you, like, how old are the stones from that particular pyramid, or do you happen to know? Because I guess there's always that conjecture of going, well, the ancient Egyptians made it. It says, no, someone made it before because there had been water erosion marks where there had been a river or whatever. So what's your views on that?
Well, I appreciate that, but let me just say, yes, Egyptology is doing a disservice to people because they are a science that has stopped at their hypothesis and not demonstrated the things that they say normal people could do all the time. But anyway, the age of the stones are probably millions of years old. But that's not what he's asking. He's asking when the Great Pyramid was assembled. And the age of the stones is different than when they were cut. Do you get my drift? I think that's funny myself.
Right.
But anyway, actually, when the Great Pyramid was assembled is not really the focus of my research. Some say it was 4,500 years ago. Egyptologists say that, so you know that that's probably wrong. But possibly pre catastrophe, if you will. The last catastrophe, possibly pre-flood or whatever you want to call it, and that's why it's shrouded in so much mystery, and it appears that the ancient Egyptian culture didn't have the technology to even make the components, let alone build the structure. So possibly quite old, but again, that's not the focus of my research.
Well, let's get back onto that. We were talking about about the pump. Do you want to explain a little bit about what you feel is going on with the pyramids, the point of the pyramids, the usage, and maybe why, for whatever time, it stopped being used and it's been sort of covered up?
Well, it's certainly been covered up in a way. I think that its purpose and how it was built is certainly misunderstood. A lot of people think the story Egyptologists have come up with is wrong because it simply can't be done, like cows jumping over a moon. It just can't be done. But I think that the Great Pyramid was built, and it had a purpose. It had a function. I think that the Great Pyramid was a functioning machine that actually did something. And the Great Pyramid was built at a high cost. It's a huge structure, 45 stories tall, but that huge cost, was actually a wise investment because the Great Pyramid had a return on investment. The Great Pyramid, I think, was infrastructure for the civilization that built it, and that it was a prosperity machine. It turned the desert into a garden, and it turned toil into leisure, and it turned poverty into prosperity. And it did all of those things by being built to be a single purpose, and that is to pump water.
Right. Well, obviously, look at places like California and Vegas and stuff. The water stops running, the doors close up. It is so painfully, almost laughably dependent on this very fragile, source of energy and like you say, prosperity. It seems really strange, and like you said, there's a thing of, obviously, they put their money and their time and their energy in something that obviously was a deal, going to be a deal breaker, because I don't think that, you always hear those stories, and I'm sorry, I'm rattling, but you hear the stories like, oh, well, these were for whatever great pharaoh, and their egos were so immense that they had to have this great big. I'm like, well, why didn't they just make a gigantic shape of themselves, or why did they not, just like whatever?
That's a good point. That is a good point.
So it's just it never quite rang true, and just like they talk about all the long tunnels, I forget the name of them. I know they have different names, and they go, oh no, well, this was an air chamber. Well, why do they necessarily need an air chamber in a sarcophagus? That wouldn't make any sense. Why did most of, like in the Great Pyramid, as I understand, they didn't have like a lot of the organ jars and the things like that, right? It was different than a lot of the pyramids.
Right. Yes, the Great Pyramid is different than a lot of the other pyramids. It has no ornamentation inside. There's no formal writing inside the passages and chambers, just like the engine of your car has no elaborate writing inside the cylinders, because it doesn't need any. It's a machine. And the Great Pyramid was a machine that pumped water through the passages and chambers and provided prosperity. Civilizations usually develop their infrastructure first and then the high civilization comes after that. The Hoover Dam was built before Las Vegas became a big city, if you will, and so it's we think that it was infrastructure and that ancient high technology, that water pumping technology, can be redeveloped to help our modern but very troubled world.
Well, I'm sitting here thinking because, like I said, I live in Western Kentucky, I mean, almost the Midwest, almost into Missouri and stuff, and man, there's water holes everywhere here. I mean, there's a lot of cave systems and like karst systems with a lot of aquifers, so we're very blessed on that. And you take a place like you said, anywhere in a desert area or like maybe a high plains area or whatever like that that doesn't have much water, and obviously that's crucial. Um, Without getting too far off into like a conspiracy thing, so watch me if I do. Um, who do you feel built it? Do you feel it was the Egyptians? Do you feel it was like a previous race or a precursor to the Egyptians? Of course, everybody wants to throw in Atlanteans, tying that in with pyramids or any group of aliens or Anunnaki and all that. You can get really ancient. I'm sitting there doing my ancient aliens hand. I have a bald head, otherwise I'd push my hair up and go aliens. But without going into aliens, what's your best guess?
Well, it's hard to say who built it, as well as it is hard to say when it was built. But I don't know who it was, and let's say we found out it was who it was. Okay, let's say we found out it was somebody named Bob. All right, we know Bob built it. Okay, now we know the answer to that question. It was Bob. Well, the very next question you ask is, well, how did he do it? And why did he do it? Okay, those are the things you want to know. So again, who built it is beyond the scope of my research, because I know researchers who are spending their entire careers trying to find out who built it, but who built it, it's not really that important at all. But I know the characteristics of the people that built it, and that they were geniuses. They understood aspects of physics that maybe we don't understand, and they were understood properties of water, and they understood how to provide prosperity for their own civilization, and they funded a huge project, that provided a huge return on investment. So it was, I don't know the name of the guy who funded it, but I do know that he and the people that built it were geniuses.
Well, that's funny. It kind of takes me to my next question in the chat room. Tara from Nashville, Tennessee, was asking, says, was there water generators? I guess I don't know if they mean that move the water, or maybe she meant that the water also helped produce a certain amount of energy, or you ran something, like a water wheel for an electrical generator. I don't know if there would be any proof or any sort of signs, anything like that in the pyramids.
We think the pumped water had a lot of purposes. One certainly would be irrigation. The Nile Valley has had, before the Aswan High Dam, a yearly inundation, but a once a year flood isn't really adequate to grow crops at the optimum. If you know what I mean. They
Right.
needed year-round irrigation, which Great Pyramid provided that. But certainly, power-heavy machinery. The Industrial Revolution was started on water power up in the Pacific, or in the Atlantic Northeast, if you will, because they had a lot of rivers, water wheels, and stuff. So they used water power to do a host of things, and probably used water power to generate compressed air, which has a lot of uses, both scientific and industrial.
Sure.
So I see the Giza Plateau as more of an industrial park than a graveyard, if you will.
Right.
So the Great Pyramid was kind of the capstone of a whole industrial complex in very ancient times with that pumped water. But you can use pumped water or for a lot of things.
Well, I know I was just going to throw this in to also respond to Tara as well, and thank you for the questions, guys. Um, I know here locally we have something called well, it's Big Springs. It was actually part of the Forest March of the Trail of Tears, and we used to have a very large round cylinder there, and I guess they had used the water coming from that, turning a paddle to run the grind mills. So they would crush corn and wheat, and after it's been threshed out, and so
Right.
it took away from a lot of that manual labor, and then it allowed them to do other things and become more prosperous. So it's not so much from the sweat of their brow, and they're like you said again. Once you become technologically advanced, boy, wish I could talk today. Um, but once they get to that point, it frees you up from that, oh, I'm just surviving point, to going, oh, well, now we can make some storehouses of grains, and then we can maybe start doing some. And I'm sure that helped with trades with other cultures, and then you start, becoming more metropolitan and knowledgeable of the world, and then all that, and so you have all those different things. Um, I wonder in your research with the pump, which is it's like I said, it's so weird because like you said, you grow up your whole life, and that's all you hear. Oh, it was a tomb, and it was this and that, and I was like, what a waste of space. It doesn't make any sense. I don't think that it just didn't. They didn't. I mean, don't get me wrong. They did extremely ornate artwork. They did a lot of uh, beautiful gold work and types of metal work, but they didn't seem like they were necessarily about just wasting space. It seemed like they tried to use every inch of whatever as something. I'm not saying they were Spartan, but they definitely, it's like, look, if I'm doing something, if I'm putting my energy into it, there's got to be a return. I mean, they kind of went at it sort of somewhat of a business ethic quality to it to me,
Well,
and
certainly, I think it was it served a purpose and had a return. It wasn't just a big pile of rocks, if you will. And my second book, titled "The Great Pyramid Prosperity Machine," describes how water moves through the Great Pyramid, but also on the return of investment for that water. Yeah, we build hydroelectric dams. They're 99% solid with some passages and chambers inside of them. And the Great Pyramid is pretty much 99% solid with some passages and chambers inside of it. There was a lot of force in the movement of water, and the building needed to be strong. So that's a purpose for having all of that massive construction.
well, I mean, yeah, it makes sense. And from what you can tell, and like I said, I'm not as knowledgeable, obviously, about this as you are. Um, did it seem like more or less whatever water that they were able to funnel in, I'm assuming from some deep well, by its own pressure, pushed up and then would wash down into and then run off into different projects, I assume? Is that sort of the way how it happened, or can you give a little bit of more of a detail on it, because I just don't know, and I don't have any pictures or anything up for people to see this. So if you can kind of give like
Well,
a radio
certainly.
version, it would help.
Yeah, I do have two DVD documentaries from Amazon.com, and the second one describes the water pumping process. But the original builders, who were geniuses, delivered water to the base of the Great Pyramid. And many researchers think that water had a profound relationship with the Great Pyramid. That water entered the upper end of the descending passage. Other researchers contend that water entered the upper end of the descending passages, including Christopher Dunn and others. And that water moved down to the subterranean chamber, which is about 100 feet below the base of the Great Pyramid. And half of that chamber was filled with water, and the upper half with air. And the movement of the water moving down. This is a very abbreviated version of an explanation, but it compressed the air in the subterranean chamber, which the compressed air pushed some water up through the grotto and then up to the bottom end of the Grand Gallery. We think the Grand Gallery, being watertight, they used electrolysis in that chamber. Other researchers think that electrolysis occurred inside the Great Pyramid. They separated the hydrogen and oxygen from the water, and that those gases combined are combustible. When you ignite those gases, the result, believe it or not, is a vacuum. And that vacuum helped draw water up the Grand Gallery. And then that water, it's like a 300-ton water piston, moved water back. When that water piston was allowed to move down, it pushed water into the Queen's chamber, and then ultimately into the King's chamber, and then out the King's chamber vents. But that's a very abbreviated explanation.
I'm sitting there listening to this, and it's like it really does sound like an engine. I mean, the pistons and the vacuum, and then the suction comes back up, and I'm giving a really remedial explanation of this, but it very much sounds like, and it's sort of a self-perpetuating thing. It seems like when they set it up, it's rolling. It's probably
Yes.
It's like it has a lot of parts, a lot of upkeep, and it just did its job.
That's why there was such extreme precision in the passages and chambers, because it was a machine. The precision for storm drains, a storm drain that's about 300 feet long will vary about a quarter of an inch for a storm drain. That's the same precision used in the passages and chambers of the Great Pyramid. The descending passage is approximately 300 feet, let's say, but it varies in straightness, if I can put it that way, about a quarter of an inch. So industrial applications have the same type of precision. It's a machine. It's nothing to do with religion, nothing to do with symbolic stuff, nothing to do with alignments. It's a machine. All hydroelectric dams have passages that point to stars, and it has nothing to do with stars. So it was a thing that actually helped people in a tangible way. So that's the direction of our research.
I'm sitting here, like I said, as you talk and everything's going through my head, I'm like, okay, I got to ask him this. I got to ask him this. When you're talking about like the changing sizes and stuff, I know a lot of times, obviously, like if you have a sewer line, you're going to have a certain descending grade. Otherwise, all that mess is going to back up into your house or into an L in your pipe, and then it's going to build pressure, and it's just going to be a mess. It seems like that. It's so funny. It's just like literally like we're reinventing the wheel, or the water wheel. Actually, I had another question, if it's okay.
Sure.
All right. Terrence from Ohio asked, do you feel that the information that they got, that we're basically just slowly rediscovering, now, was that something that was buried, like, information-wise, or was that something that maybe that was lost through, like, the different ages and the plagues and things like that, like all this great information? I mean, because you'll hear people go, well, there was so much stuff in the Alexandrian library and all this and that, and then you always hear, well, there's all kinds of these ancient scrolls in like the Vatican and places like that. What do you think happened? Do you think just the kids didn't learn the crafts of the fathers and they forgot it over time? I mean, why did they stop using this machine? Did the machine stop working? What happened?
I think the Great Pyramid broke. There is some internal structural damage that wasn't caused by the hands of man, and that's in the King's chamber. Some stones were separated, or there was an expansive force inside the King's chamber. Most researchers acknowledge that. Some call it a explosion occurred in the King's chamber, and but I think that there was a problem inside the King's chamber, and the hydraulic force of the water pushed the stones apart a little bit, and then that chamber became where it wasn't watertight, and the Great Pyramid water pump broke and was unrepairable. And I talk about that in detail in my book. So but then it was just like a big hulk, a big pile of stones for a long time, possibly like I say, catastrophe. Then after the catastrophe, all the the craftsmen and support people and the technical people involved in the Great Pyramid water pump were gone, and then it was just a great big structure. So things change. We lose understanding of a lot of ancient technology. We don't know how the stones were cut, and we don't know. There's a lot of things we don't know. So information is lost easily.
Well, once you started really pulling this together, and like you said, 20 something years that you've been compiling this and kind of testing this against that, when you went to, and I'm assuming you had to have different academia here and also in Egypt, because like I said, you visited all these places. I mean, you've actually laid in the what I guess what I call like a big aquifer, and which I was laughing because I was like, I would have done the same thing, because like I said, if I had thought it really was a sarcophagus or an ossuary or something, I wouldn't do that. But that's the first thing I would have done, man. That, or I would have stepped back, like, and I'm sure you may have done this too, like where it's in the foreground and you kind of put it between your fingers, like you're holding it. I'm a big kid, but I just like,
Oh yeah.
I'm thinking, okay, I like this guy already. He's got a good sense of humor about it. But when you brought this to people, or tried to bring it to people, I'm trying to pick my words correctly because I don't want to down anybody, because I also know that they're walking a thin line too, and nobody wants to lose their job, nobody wants to lose their footing, or tenure and stuff. But two questions. First of all, I'm assuming you brought this information to them. How did they react publicly, and did any react privately differently than they did, like on paper or in the public sector?
Well, I've certainly done research, and I've written 2 books and produced 2 DVD documentaries about the Great Pyramid, and been on many talk shows and magazine articles and all of that, traveled to Egypt and that type of thing. But from the academic community, like Egyptology and archaeologists, there is essentially just a wall of silence. So there's nothing.
I hate that. I really do hate that, because
yeah, nothing.
this is their history. And if the history is okay, I'm like this. If you come to me and it's like, okay, well, we just always kind of lived here and we're kind of simple people, and it's like, yeah, but you're descendants of kings that not only just were awesome, they were great inventors. They were some of the very first innovators in our times. Yeah, I'll take that. I don't know why there's such a push, unless it's like, we've got so much money invested in this,
Yeah,
line of thought.
in their narrative, they have a narrative that they are going to maintain, and it's usually the last people that change are the is academia. Everyone else will understand it. I know very few people that are out of high school that believe the strong back ramp story and precision stone cutting with hand tools. So Egyptologists will be the last ones to change, and but a lot of people are accepting this direction of research. A lot of technical people that work in shipyards, people that work on their own car, people that crane operators and technical people like that. I consider them my peers much more than Egyptologists that are in effect storytellers. So the interest has been very high, and I'm just humbled by that. So people are drawn to this direction of research about examining the direct physical evidence and making an explanation as to how that Great Pyramid came to be. And people use the word compelling when they see our videos about the assembly process, or the videos about how the water moved through the Great Pyramid. It gives a functional meaning to the features both inside and outside of the Great Pyramid.
Well, I was going to ask you too, and after asking you this, I want to make sure that you put your addresses back out again, and any upcoming stuff, because so we've probably got about 20 minutes left, but I want to make sure to highlight that during the show. Like as I had mentioned off air, worked in prison systems forever at the Kentucky State Penitentiary. I'm turning to Porky Pig for some reason. The Kentucky State Penitentiary. There we go. And that was actually put together with limestone by Italian stonemasons. And a friend of mine had recently found this very large metal wheel, like a cogged wheel, almost like a bicycle wheel or spoke.
Huh.
And come to find out, that is where they had a waterway about 1,000 feet down a grade, and they had used, long ropes, series of ropes, and counterweights to help pull those up. And lots of people died in that. People were getting crushed. Things would shift. And the thing about those are, unlike the pyramid stones, those had those big, what do you call those? I don't know if they're called guide rods, but we'll put the big metal rods to help shift it into place perfectly and all that. There was none of that. I mean, it's a beautiful structure. It's a scary structure, but it's beautiful. It looks like a large castle. But even then, like you said, you see the friction marks and contract marks, and where they've chiseled it to try to get it as close to perfect as they can. But you can still see the work done on it. It's not like, oh, this is a perfectly symmetrical and smooth like glass. And it's just I'm scratching my head going, that was not 150 years ago. This was like thousands and thousands of years ago, and it just blows my mind just how they got it so darn precise and everything. But as you said, for it to be watertight, it would have to be that close together. Were there any of the other pyramids, or not even so much in Egypt, and this may be outside of your wheelhouse of study, have you found any other correlating things maybe with other pyramids of something similar? Because of course you hear, well, that pyramid, they just had sacrifices and they had this and that, and I wonder if that was just an Egyptian thing, or if that was a knowledge that had been spread throughout, be it from an ancient culture or aliens.
Certainly, there's pyramids all over the earth, both ancient and modern, and they vary in design, vary in workmanship. Some are quite primitive, but none compare with the Great Pyramid. And certainly the focus of my research is the Great Pyramid, how it was built and why. I'm sure that there are pyramids out there that are not water pumps. So my research isn't about other pyramids not being a water pump. My research is about the Great Pyramid being a water pump. A lot of people say, well, pyramids had a purpose, so if one pyramid isn't a water pump, then that means the Great Pyramid isn't a water pump, and that's a very flawed research method, if you will.
Right.
But we're specific with the Great Pyramid. So, like I say, different designs, different features. Some pyramids are made out of rubble, if you will. The Great Pyramid is made out of stone blocks, and many of them are cut with extreme precision, bonded together, watertight with a very strong bonding agent. So, again, I just focus on the construction project known as the Great Pyramid.
Gotcha. I know that you had done a documentary, and this may be one of the ones that you mentioned, with Dr. Schock. I believe I'm getting his name correct.
Yes.
And
Robert Schock.
Yes. I love his work as well. Let me ask you this: in regards of focusing on this pyramid, have there been any sort of like ground penetrating radar or anything like that you might have found things deeper below it? I mean, because I'm very curious. It's like, well, it's kind of like a tip of an iceberg. Maybe there's even a larger substructure below that. Had you found any sort of evidence of anything like that, or any people saying, well, there's a possibility of there's more to it than what we see, which is, I mean, of course, massive, but I wondered just how deep it goes, pardon the pun.
Well, the Great Pyramid gives up its secrets very slowly. Certainly, there's been some recent scans of the Great Pyramid and the Giza Plateau area. The scans are not evidence; they're interpretations of evidence, if you will. I know that there's been two scans that have been quite famous in the last 4 or 5 years of the Great Pyramid. One produced a fuzzy picture that was interpreted to be an internal spiral ramp, but the second scan didn't detect any internal spiral ramp. So these scans are contradictory to each other, if you will. So, you have to take that information with a grain of salt. Scans are expensive of the Great Pyramid, in excess of $1 million by the time you get done with the Egyptian government. So if somebody funds $1 million scan, what's going to happen is they're going to find something. You get my drift?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I take those scans with a grain of salt, maybe even a bag of salt. So we'll see what happens. I know it's tantalizing information, these scans, but does they usually produce fuzzy pictures that are an interpretation of data collected in maybe not the best manner, if you will. So I don't put much, much
Credence.
emphasis. Yeah, I don't know, not much credence in these scans. When they produce photographs of supposedly hidden chambers, then that's a whole nother story. But we'll see. A lot of conjecture is generated from these scans, but what its value is debatable.
All right. Well, let me ask you another thing. And before I get real deep into it, do you want to mention again your DVDs and your site, or any other things you got coming up, especially any conventions or appearances or whatnot? Feel free to do that.
Well, we've always got radio shows that we're doing. I've done well over 100, and that's a lot of fun. Gets the information out. Our website to contact me by email is www.thepump.org, and that's our foundation's website. And I have produced 2 documentaries. The first one is Building the Great Pyramid Using Water Locks and Barges. That's on Amazon. It describes how the Great Pyramid was built. My second book is my second DVD is simply called The Great Pyramid Water Pump. A lot of computer generated animations in both of those DVD documentaries available on Amazon. My 2 books are Lost Technologies of the Great Pyramid in Kindle and ebook format, and that describes how the Great Pyramid was assembled. And my second book
Oh, are you there, sir? Did I lose you? Well, hang on, folks. I think we may have lost Mr. Myers, but he should be right back with us. Um, I was going to say that looking at the technologies and looking at the.
How
There
do we
he
call
is.
this guy?
Here we are. Here we go. I got you. Can you hear me, sir?
Oh, crap.
Hold on. Are you there, Mr. Myers?
Oh, there we go.
Hey, are you there, bud?
I am.
Ha ha! Oh, Eureka! I was going to ask you
Yeah.
something real quick, and I know one of your main goals for doing this, beyond getting the information out, is water and famine and all that goes together. All of the lack of rainfall and all that goes together.
It
And
does.
you know, uh, I would be really excited to see somebody like Elon Musk or another, big player in this, who seems to be very interested in technologies, to go, well, hey, let's go to somewhere, a very arid area or whatever, and do at least on a small scale, like a tester, and see what they can do. Because I've heard, and this is the internet, so of course it's true, those different machines that they'll put out and to basically draw humidity out of the air to make usable water. I wonder if, or have you happened to contact anybody along those lines about possibly funding a project?
Well, we're a nonprofit foundation, and we're a 501c3 nonprofit foundation, and all donations are tax deductible. I we're it's myself and several other people, and I think we're better researchers than we are running a nonprofit foundation, if you will. And funding has been a struggle. We want to redevelop this ancient technology, but it's a hard sell, if you will, and it's because it's so unusual explanation for the Great Pyramid, distant antiquity, and all of that. So we're working on redeveloping the ancient technology, but funding has hindered us quite a bit. But we're getting the word out, and hopefully, like a big funder like Elon Musk or the guy that developed the Segway, he's another technology person, or other people, possibly the guy that started Amazon. He does a lot of unusual projects. So hopefully someday we will get some real funding to produce this type of technology. All you really need to develop it is some PVC pipe, some off-the-shelf valves, some polypropylene containers, and some custom fabrication to help develop it. But everything costs, and funding has been a problem.
Sure. I wonder, like, how deeply they had to go underground, unless they it's all collecting rains that did come. How much like actual in-ground work they had to do for that to make that
Well,
feasible.
well, at the Giza Plateau, they have the subterranean chamber. It's a large chamber that's 100 feet below ground, and the diagonal passage that goes to that down there in solid bedrock, the descending passage, is about 300 feet because it's at an angle. And then they had a passage that went up through a small chamber called the grotto, and then up onto the mound that the Great Pyramid was built on. So there is some underground excavation, but it's about 100 feet deep. So, but the water was delivered to the base of the Great Pyramid and then traveled, like I say, through the Great Pyramid.
Well, and it's sort of a thing too where like you try to tell somebody about something that was so far back, and you look at it now, it's like, well, like say somewhere that's been cleared of trees. Well, maybe 1,000 years ago there were great redwoods and whatnot, and it was very fertile. And it's sometimes for whatever reason it's hard for people to wrap their head around it. To go, well, I mean, it's been a desert for forever. It's like, well, no, obviously, Earth changes, pole changes, and things like that. It's just that easy to forget. We are really a species with amnesia. We've forgotten so much of who we were and what we're capable of that, like you said, I think people get locked into that position. Nobody wants to feel like the kind of like the stupid child, then that their grandparents are great. Everybody wants to feel, oh, well, we're so technically advanced. We're cutting edge. It's like, we're kind of walking around in our dad's shoes, stumbling around for the most part. We're just relearning what we forgot at best, I think. And so, I mean, I don't know. I really do hope that things keep going well with your organization, and then you keep putting out quality work like you do. And I have to say that so many people, like I said, come with agendas, and I understand that to a point. They've got something they want to say, they've got something they're kind of pushing, but you've never, in all the talk that we've had, I've not really heard anything just overtly negative, anything cutting or judgmental on somebody. Just like, look, this is what I'm finding. I really hope that someone will see value in it, and I really like that. You have sort of and I mean this with the most respect. You kind of have a Tesla quality to you. You want to find this information, you want to put it out for people and see them live better lives and do good things with it. And I think it's really admirable.
I appreciate that. That's where we're coming from. We just want to redevelop this ancient technology that it will be an alternative to nuclear power, coal-fired power plants, and use it just to help the world. That's all we're trying to do. We're a nonprofit foundation. There's certainly no money in it. Been at this for quite a while, and it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. But I think the ancient people were geniuses, and they understood technology that we are not fully aware of or have developed. and I just want to develop this ancient technology. So that's where we're coming from. I hope people visit our website at thepump.org.
Well, you heard the man. Stephen Meyer, thank you for being on. If you'll stick around, I'll talk to you just as quick as I'm done with my outro. And it was great having you on, sir.
Oh, I was honored, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you again. And everybody, I want you to have a good day. Go out there and make sure to visit his page and also visit stevieasher.com. Check out my page on YouTube, The House of Asher. And also check it out on TalkStream Live. Check it out on Spotify and all those different places. Tune in. But I want you to go out and enjoy the rest of your day and get a little sunshine in your face and make some good memories with your family. But as the sun sinks low and the shadows grow long, make sure to check under your bed, in your closet, out your back door. You never know what you might find out there. Don't be afraid to be a little scared, because sometimes living on the edge and learning things that kind of push your boundaries is where we find our greatest discoveries. So until next time, everybody, take care. Until next time.